Hello, welcome to Careers and Coffee Season 2. I'm Lucy and I'm joined by my fabulous co-host Charlotte Picker, and we talk every week over a cup of coffee, all things careers. So Charlotte, before we start today's episode, I've got a really important question for you.
Go on.
Do you have your coffee ready?
Absolutely.
Fabulous.
Cheers.
So season 2 is a little bit different to what we did for season 1. So Charlotte and I are going to be talking across lots of different topics, joined by amazing guests. So we're going to be talking about either their skills or their experiences or their expertise. And this week we're going to be talking all about leadership. So to talk to us about this hot topic is Sophie Hussey, who is director of a consultancy company, Lapis Consultancy, which provides advice and guidance across all things service management, strategy, target operating models, and of course, leadership. So Sophie has been working in technology for nearly 25 years. She started her career working on a service desk, and then she's moved her way up, and now she's been part of senior leadership teams. And in her previous permanent role, she was deputising for the CIO, and she was doing that before she started her own consultancy business. So who better than Sophie to talk to us about leadership? And we're absolutely delighted to have you here today, Sophie. Welcome to Careers and Coffee.
Hi. Thank you very much for having me. Hi, Charlotte. Hi, Lucy.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Sophie. And we would love to hear a bit more, even though Lucy's given an amazing overview of your background. Perhaps you could introduce yourself to our audience and tell us a bit more about the detail in your role.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing I'm going to say, just to throw in a little bit of humour, is I'm a self-confessed geek, whether that's an Idol geek, a Star Wars geek, Lord of the Rings, all of that sort of stuff. I just try not to look like it on the outside.
Brilliant.
Career-wise, as Lucy said, I started on the service desk. I basically, when I was at university, that was the first time I really used a computer. And I remember asking somebody next to me, how do I use this thing called email? Because I had no idea. And then the next thing I know, 4 years later, after doing a placement year, I'm on a service desk working in IT. My career from that point, I went down the techie route, but like I said, I didn't grow up with computers, so I've had to work really hard at understanding tech, how it works, and all the sort of various components. But I do have quite a logical problem-solving brain. So I went through about 10, 15 years of being a techie, and then through various opportunities, I'll call them, redundancy, I had the opportunity to work in service management. So I ended up setting up a service management function for a large financial organization, where I ended up deputising for the CIO and all sorts of other bits and pieces, getting more involved in leadership, expanding my skill set. And then another opportunity, again, I'll call it an opportunity, arose, where I started up my own consultancy. So for the last 2 years, I've been working for myself, discovering life beyond the permanent world. I've ended up doing a lot of mentoring in the clients I have, but I've been mentoring probably for about 20 years as well. Excuse me. And I talk all things strategy, target operating model, as well as getting into the nitty gritty of this is how you set up a service desk. This is how you do your processes, all of that sort of stuff. So lots of experience in terms of both the technical side, leadership side, and lots and lots of mentoring for good measure.
So the thing that you've not mentioned is you've mentioned a little bit about your mentoring, but you've also not mentioned about some of the speaking opportunities that you've had as well.
Oh, yes. Well remembered. Thank you. Nice
self-promotion.
Thank you. So I spoke at SITS last year. I ran a workshop about mentoring, and then I ran 2 workshops at the SDI conference in Birmingham, I think it was in September, October. I can't remember, the dates all blend in, where I was talking about change management as well as talking about mentoring. I'm also hopefully going to be speaking at SITS this year as well. I really enjoy talking to people, talking to them in maybe a different way and getting them involved in interactive sessions about why things are important, what they think, as well as me being an SME sharing information.
Wow, what an amazing career, and like all the opportunities, as you've mentioned, it did make me laugh because I was talking about opportunities in air quotes you've had. It's super impressive and also quite inspiring for other women, I would say, as well. It's lovely to meet another female leader, particularly in technology.
Yeah, I really echo that. And I think that leads on to the next question, really. I feel like I might already know this answer, but did you always kind of inspire to be like a leader in tech, or was it almost a bit of a happy accident?
Well, definitely a happy accident. So I'm still waiting to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. I'm not somebody who's lucky enough to have a vocation. So my oldest daughter, she knows she wants to be a barrister. She's known that since she was probably about 10 years old. I'm not that person. I'm somebody who I know what I'm good at. I know what my skill set is, generally, ignoring the techie side of stuff, which you learn as you go along. But I've very much evolved as time has passed. So when opportunities have arisen to be a people leader, to get involved in mentoring from, like I said, from an earlier age in my career, to doing the head of stuff and strategizing and all the target operating model, I've just taken the opportunity when it arises. Right here, right now with my consultancy, I have an idea of where I'd like it to go, but I'm going to wait and see what happens, because I don't want to disappoint myself by setting myself like a really, really high specific goal and then really discovering that I need to course correct as the path goes along. I'm a complete control freak, with the exception of my career goals. With my career goals, I'm quite sort of fluid, and I try and just see what's happening at the time to figure out which way I'm going to go.
I can really relate to what you just said, because I always talk about being a generalist. So like you, I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. And, you know, these people who've got these clear specialisms and like know what they want to be, I never had that. So I feel like you, like me, are quite a generalist, and I totally understand what you mean about the fluidity. And I think actually that gives you a level of flexibility and adaptability, which is very appealing to a lot of employers, because I assume, similarly to me, you've gone to places where you've been asked to go because an employer has grown or scaled, and you've just gone, yeah, sure, I'll take the opportunity, and away you go. Yeah. And sometimes it's a actual opportunity, and other times it's just an offload of somebody else's work. But you know, with time, you realise what an opportunity with exposure is versus just an opportunity. So.
Oh, absolutely. My first main contract, I went in to do one thing, and I ended up being the director of service operations, which was not where I was expecting to go. And I was there for 18 months, which was great. Wow. But because of who I am and that sort of generalist stuff that you're talking about there, Charlotte, my skill set became obvious to the person that I was working for. So they said, hey, do you mind doing this? Sure. Do you want to do this as well? Sure. And then a couple of other things, like, maybe not so much. But if you really need me to, I'll help.
I couldn't relate to you anymore. The way you just described that, I'm like, I can hear myself. It's scary. So thinking about, because obviously you've had this amazing career, what would you say your absolute number one learning in your career has been to date that you'd like to share with our audience?
I would say, and this is something that if you see any of my posts on LinkedIn or any of my contributions, this is a theme that comes up every time.
Okay.
Stakeholder management is the number one thing, the most important thing that you will do, no matter what. Doesn't matter.
Cheers to that.
Absolutely. I'll just have a quick sip as well, so I stop the frog in the throat. I've always been a people person, whatever that phrase really means. I like people. I'm interested in people. But I also listen to what they're saying. And over time, I have learned that if you don't bring people on the journey, and this is whether you're in a team, whether you're leading a team, whatever it is, but if you don't bring people on the journey, you're never going to get the buy-in, and they're just not going to be invested in whatever you're doing. So my previous permanent role, I went in and I started up the service management function, which included the change process. Nobody likes the change process besides me, I've discovered. I love it. I think it's brilliant. But everybody was really kind of like, oh, I don't want to submit a change. Why can't I just do this? And I got them in a room and said, hey, you tell me your problems. Tell me what you want this to do. We need governance. We need this, we need that. But if you tell me what you want, I will try and develop my process that caters for that. And then I always throw in I can't promise I'll do everything, because some of the things would be like, yeah, we don't want to change process. Like, it's happening. But just trying to bring them on the journey. And then when I'd written all the documentation, it's then going back into a meeting room with them saying, right, this is what I've done. I've taken what you said here. So for me, I think, like, going back to the question, stakeholder management, it is paramount. It has to be in every interaction. Doesn't matter what job you're doing, doesn't matter what sector you're working in, doesn't matter what your like. If you think of a developers quite often in an office have got the headsets on and they're listening to music and they're tapping away, but they wouldn't be doing what they're doing if it wasn't for an interaction with a person. So no matter what you're doing, stakeholder management has got to be the number one learning. But at the same time, just as a little bit of a side bit to it, boundaries with that stakeholder management, because your team are your stakeholders as well. And one of the things that I've personally had to learn is where you have those boundaries, because I'm friendly and I really do care about people. I'm invested. I believe in leading with empathy. There are times where maybe the lines between leader or manager and team member have become blurred. So I've had to really be conscious of where those boundaries are. And certain things have happened in my career that I've had to say, right, actually, no, take a step back. And if somebody doesn't end up being my friend in the long term, whilst that's incredibly disappointing, I've got to do what's best in this leadership role that I'm doing. So it's trying to find that sweet spot, because the other thing with your stakeholder management is nobody wants a yes person. They think they want a yes person, but actually what they really need is somebody who's going to tell them the truth. So if they're
hold up the mirror.
Yeah, absolutely. If they're talking rubbish, you're like, really? I'm not quite sure that's the best approach. Why don't we consider such and such? But then using your stakeholder management skills is how you then bring them on board and going back to what I was saying before, bringing them on the journey. So that's got to be my number one learning.
I mean, hard relate.
Yeah, honestly, really, there was lots of bits in there, and the bit that you were saying there around taking people on a journey, it always surprises me, like, again, how I've had managers, not necessarily leaders, who have never taken teams on the journey. Or so it kind of leads me on to kind of the next question, and you've touched upon it a little bit, is how would you describe your leadership style?
I wouldn't be able to describe it in one word, but I think I lead with empathy. I think that's the best way to describe it. But then, as like the overarching, I'm fair but firm. I want to develop people. For me, as a leader, the most important thing, your role, okay, whatever strategy, whatever it is you're trying to deliver, but the most important thing in that role is to develop the people who are working for you. They are the heroes. You are not the hero. You are just the person that is coordinating things and giving the direction. So I think for me, it is making sure that the people in my team, anybody that I'm leading, they have the opportunity and feel safe to share their ideas, to voice their opinions, and to be part of that delivery. So I actually did a contribution for an article on LinkedIn the other day where it was talking about leadership and things you need to consider. Not all leaders have the best ideas. We are the people that are defining the strategy, but we're not necessarily doing the do. And it's the teams that are the people that are doing the do. And they might say, actually, do you know, that's a terrible idea. We don't have capability to do that. But if you don't, as a leader, if you don't give them that sort of space to provide feedback and input and drive things forwards, then things aren't going to go the way you want them to. So again, going back to the question, I like to talk about this subject, very passionate about it. I lead with empathy, fair but firm. But the other thing is, I want to have a laugh, because you're working with these people who you spend more time with in some respects than you do your family. And maybe not contrary to popular belief, but maybe slightly controversially, nobody works at 100%. Anybody who says they're working at 100%, I'd be like, oh, you know, do you not have a break? Do you not look at TikTok every so often? So you've got to have downtime. And in order to be able to have downtime, you've got to have that decent rapport, that sort of having a joke and a laugh with your team. And that's not necessarily going on nights out or anything else like that, but just having the ability to just sort of down tools for a minute and have a conversation. Going back to that whole stakeholder management piece is engaging with people. So yeah, empathy, leading with empathy, firm but fair, and then just wanting to make things fun, enjoyable.
Yeah. Sophie, I love everything you said there, obviously. I actually have a question for both of you as leaders. Do you think that leadership styles have changed kind of post-pandemic? And I guess, Charlotte, we'll start with you.
I don't think so necessarily. I think that people have had to learn to be more remote leaders, but for me, I've managed teams remotely prior to the pandemic, so my personal style hasn't really changed because I've always had that, you know, having to join what was like a Skype call, or like previously, but I would go and travel to the country that the team were in every so often. Less so doing that, but in terms of my style, I'm still very much the same person, very similar to Sophie. In fact, I was listening again, like hard relate. I'm very much people first leader. So, you know, I believe that you're only successful if your team's successful. So it's an enabler, or somebody once described to me a leader should be like a conductor of an orchestra, that they're conducting all the people that are doing all the doing. And so for me, I think other than, you know, having to think about how do we have more touch points because everybody's been remote, and then having to kind of think about, okay, how do you bring people into the room when you're having an in-person meeting, but some of your team are remote and are not going to be there? How do you make that work? I think some of the practical things I've had to think about, but in terms of my style, that's not changed. I am who I am, and I don't think that the pandemic's impacted that. What about you, Sophie?
Yeah, for the most part, I agree. My style hasn't changed, apart from me as an individual evolving the more sort of leadership roles and things I'm getting involved in. I think generally, the styles are the same. I think the one thing where people have changed is, whilst there's a lot of people talking, and whether it's on LinkedIn or in the media, whatever, talking about empathy, I actually think there's less empathy now post-pandemic than there was before. That's the one thing. So there's lots of talk about hybrid working, and lots of companies are pushing people to go back into the office. And whilst I understand the business drivers for that, the human element, the empathy, cost of living crisis, all of that sort of stuff, I see that has dipped. And whilst it's maybe not changing in people's leadership styles, but I think there's that fine line between what the business needs and what your team needs, and you've got to balance the two, because without the team you don't have the business, without the business you don't have the team. So but going to my personal style, I've been the same, I think, the whole time. One of my previous roles, I had the remotest team I've ever had to work with, which was an interesting challenge because part of the team were in New Zealand, and I hadn't experienced working with people in a completely different time zone before.
It's fun, hey?
It was long days. It was, but interesting to work with different cultures as well at the same time. I think I'm the same as I was before. Just evolving my approach, just to try and make sure that I continue my style and keep being unapologetically me. And I think, going back to the question you asked me before about the one thing that I've learned, that's the other thing that I've learned. While stakeholder management is number one, as a woman in tech, there's a number of things that you have to do, or I felt that I have had to do to survive. But now, as I'm sort of nearing 50, and whilst I might not necessarily look it, but I am
definitely don't look nearly 50.
It's 3 years away. Is I'm unapologetically me now. I don't think anybody would ever question my authenticity, or when they have done, it's been an interesting conversation. But I think just being yourself is very, very powerful. I know that's slightly off topic and off the question that you'd asked, Lucy, but I think it all links together in that if you find that your leadership style has shifted post-pandemic for whatever reasons, you need to go back and look at your values, understand what it is that you want to be, where you want to go, and remember that no matter what, you've got to be yourself, you've got to be authentic.
The reason why I asked the question was just from kind of my own experience working with leaders and having leaders managing me, is I've noticed an empathy shift for sure, like in a good way. Whereas before it was like, be in the office, be there, do this, hours, bums on seats, to having a little bit more like, how are you? How are you doing? And I think that as much as the pandemic was an awful time, I actually think it's given a lot of people like better skill sets as well. Forgive me for saying that. So that's why I asked the question. But thanks both for your answers.
But it's interesting that you say that, Lucy, because for me personally, I feel like I've always been that type of leader, which is like, I don't care whether you work your like 9 till 5, as long as you get your work done. I trust you until you give me a reason not to.
Yeah,
that's how I start out with everybody. And I think more and more people who are in a people management or people leadership role should operate that way, because you should never, because what I see is that some managers, and I use the word manager rather than leader, treat people like they're still at school.
Yeah.
Like, oh, are you on your lunch break? When will you be here? Like, are you coming to the, like, we're adults. We should feel empowered, and we should empower our teams and enable them to be successful. You know, I feel like being in a position of privilege when you're leading a team of people, it's a luxury to have. And it's not everybody's bag, right? But it's really interesting that you both said about the empathy piece, because I've always felt that that's the way that I've operated. But it's interesting, Lucy, you saying that you've seen people shift more that way. And I'm wondering whether it's like a generational thing as well.
Yeah.
But also, sidebar, 50, you don't look anywhere near 50, Sophie. I nearly fell off my chair when you said that. So sorry, back to what we're talking about. I just had to flag that. I was shocked. And it takes a lot to shock me. So thinking about actually leading teams, Sophie, what would you say is the hardest part of leading any team?
People are the hardest part of managing them. I think when I was prepping for the session today, it's kind of ironic in that it's all about people, and you've got to be a people first leader and all that sort of stuff. But the hardest thing to do with any of it, I mean, you can do all the HR forms, you can do all the admin, you can do everything else, but the unknown quantity that you never have 100% answer for is the people that you're working with, because everybody's a unique individual, and you never quite know. It doesn't matter how well you know somebody, how people are going to respond to certain situations. And I think that's where being an empathy-led, a people-first leader really is important, rather than those people that you were saying before about managers versus leaders. Yeah. There's such a huge gap between those two things, and not necessarily much understanding of the gap between those. But as a leader, you've got to be able to listen. You've got to take into consideration someone else's thoughts, points of view, their feelings, but not only from what's going on with them at work. Whilst it's none of your business as a leader what's going on in their personal life, their personal life will always come into work. If something bad's happening, or even if something really good's happening, it can change people's focus. It can change their demeanor in the workplace. It can change how they're interacting with other people. So I would 100% say the hardest thing about being a people leader or leading people full stop is the humans. Humans are hard work. They're lovely, mostly, but they're hard work.
What do you think, Lucy? You've led teams of people. What's your answer to this?
Probably the same. I think sometimes the hardest, slightly different but same, sometimes I find the hardest thing, or the most challenging thing, is sometimes all the paperwork and all the processes. And sometimes I think we miss, if someone's been like signed off sick or like needs support, HR always give you like a process to follow, but a person isn't a process. So there's been times where I have managed teams and someone's had to like take a day off or this, that, and the other, and I've not put it through the system because there's no tick box for me to put that through. And I think that can be a challenge because you have kind of rules and regulations that you have to follow as a I guess as a manager, but as a leader, you know, sometimes you just have to push them to one side. So I think it's about, for me, that's probably what and it's been a while since I've managed a team or led a team, but that's probably the biggest challenge I had, was kind of the governance and the paperwork around it.
That's interesting. I think one of the other challenges that I'd like to raise is that when you have a team, and sometimes when you have a big team, when you think about having to do one-to-ones with every one of them, that can sometimes take the whole day of your calendar a week. And then plus you've got your own job and your own outcomes and work to do as well. And it's like being able to manage all of that as well. And I think that can be a real challenge for some people. And it depends on your experience and the size and shape of your team. But it's definitely something that I wanted to flag to our audience, that if anybody's feeling that way, that, you know, lots of us have felt that way at some point or another. That can be a really hard part, particularly because historically people, when they get promoted, oh, you're now going to have people. And not everybody is a people leader or wants to be a people leader. And I think, you know, it can really change the balance of how you prioritize your day. I don't know if you guys have anything to add on that point.
Just completely agree with you there. I mean, my last Permi role, I had like a good number of people. It wasn't too excessive. And then I've since led a lot of people where the team started at one size and then it grew for whatever reasons it grew. And then trying to juggle that and trying to juggle the people side of it in terms of, you've got all the admin bits and pieces, but different people want different frequencies of one-to-ones. And I've worked that can be difficult, and they want different extents of one-to-ones. I'm a big fan of a one-to-one being about development and personal 100%. Growth, not about tactical stuff. If you want to talk about tactical day-to-day work stuff, that's great. Let's talk about that in a team meeting or in a dedicated session. Your one-to-one should be about you, your career, how you want to progress. But I've also worked with clients who have unbelievable large numbers of people to manage, and it's very, very difficult, as like exactly as you say, trying to do that and do your day-to-day job. How do you find the time? But at that point, there's got to be something for you as a leader. You've got to say, hey, the operating model does not work. Exactly. We need to do something, whether it's an internal promotion, whether it's finding another role that can help manage this sort of massive behemoth that is however many people you're looking after. But you've got to look at why it is like that. I think generally your optimum level of numbers of people to manage shouldn't be more than 10, in my opinion. If you can get it less,
I totally agree with you.
Yeah, because it's not manageable. Because also the more you give of yourself, in one respect, you're not giving them what you need or what they need from the strategic standpoint and truly leading them.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think I have had 12 at one point, and just having those extra 2 was quite a lot. And it sounds silly just saying extra 2 people, but to your point, everyone has, I want my one-to-one to be this and this length and this frequency, and everyone's got their own needs. And this was across 2 completely different teams. So, and whilst it was only for short term, I agree, 10 is absolute max. Even for the most experienced leader, I've seen them be like, I am not having more than 10 direct reports. But I think it comes with experience, that you know what your limitations are as a leader in terms of what you can give and what's the right amount. Because I think I actually surprised Lucy about this. So I'm really interested to know what you think, what your experience has been on this, Sophie. But Lucy asked me in one of our earlier episodes, like, she didn't ask me. I think she said, so obviously, Charlotte, you must have had like leadership and people management training. And I was like, nope, never. And I think there's this perception that like everyone goes on this training course and suddenly there are these leaders and managers. Sophie, have you ever been on a management or leadership course, or are you like me and you've made it up as you've gone along and taken all the good bits of the managers that you've really liked working for and tried to make it your own style?
Excuse me. I'm just going to cough 1 second.
It's okay.
I'm just going to mute for 1 second. Yes and no.
Okay.
To answer the question. So, no, until about 3 years ago. I've had to figure it out as I've gone along. Anything that I was sent on was basically a carbon copy of my university degree, which I didn't really learn anything from because it was too generic and a bit. Anyway, yeah, that's a whole other episode. I've been on things like insights training and performance training and stuff like that, but none of it really hit the mark. None of it tells you how to be a leader, and I don't think you can train somebody to lead.
No, I agree.
I don't think leaders are born. I think you can learn how to lead, but I don't think it's learned through sitting in a classroom being told to do something. I think it's through experience, through understanding what good looks like and also understanding what bad looks like. I've had many leaders, or probably managers, excuse me, who tried, but they were not leaders. So I've thought very much as I've been going along, I'm not doing that. If I ever catch myself doing that, I'm going to slap myself around the face, have a really strong word myself, and not do that again.
Yeah,
I think that quite often companies have these leadership programs, and then they give an individual a team once they've finished the program. But the classroom is not a substitute for experience. And sometimes it works to be thrown into the deep end and just try and figure it out as you go along. But you've got to make sure that people have the necessary support materials and people to talk to, mentoring, whatever is available, so that they can actually truly manage. We'll talk manage there, really, about managing a team, because it's not a tick box exercise. It is actually trying to help people. So, I always find leadership training entertaining because, the ones I've been on, I'm like, okay, I'm going to smile, I'm going to nod, I'm going to listen. I'll voice my opinion, but I often also find this is where my sort of authentic side, I might just dampen it a little bit, because sometimes they don't want my opinion in those sessions or in those sorts of training things, because if I think they're talking rubbish, that is not the time for me to tell them. But at the same time, I want to be a leader and support what the organisation's doing and support the people that do find the value from those sorts of things. But I think it's not cookie cutter. You can't just say out of the box, here's some leadership training, sit in this course for 3 days, and then here you go, you're a leader. It just doesn't happen.
I agree.
The leadership training, it's funny hearing you both talk about it, and Charlotte, you again, really, because I definitely did some leadership training, becoming a new manager kind of training really early on in my career. And as I think about it now, I've never used any of it once, because it's really like, it was like that parent-child kind of conversation, but basically talk to somebody as if they're an adult, which surely that's just common sense. And a lot of it just isn't helpful. And I was like you, Sophie, I would sit there in these trainings and being like, I know that very early on, I was like, I know I'm very new at this, but surely this isn't common sense. And I would say, well, isn't that common sense? Isn't that just having some empathy or just understanding people? So it's really, I do think there's elements where there is, the insights training, or like the Myers-Briggs. I think that can be really helpful for kind of development conversations. But I think as a leader, I'm going to say this, and I haven't said it for a while, but I think sometimes having that coach-like approach is going to benefit you, full stop, whether you're a people leader or whether you're like running a program and you're leading a team from a program point of view. Just like add my 5 pence worth in there.
I completely agree with that. Like same as like emotional intelligence training, that stuff. It's interesting. I've done insights. I've done Myers-Briggs. I've done emotional intelligence stuff, and it's interesting to know, but also interesting to know what the results are for the other people that I'm working with, so that from my stakeholder management piece, I can figure out actually which sort of approach do I need to take with these people? What are the other considerations I need to make? The one thing that I struggle with those things is I'm an introvert, a massive introvert, but you will never get that impression of me from talking to me in the workplace. If we meet separately outside of work and we're in a big group of people, you will see it, because I am incredibly shy. I don't people very well in situations where it's like massive social situations. So when I do things like Myers-Briggs, my first question to the people is, how do you want me to answer this? Sophie from work or Sophie at home? Because whilst I am still authentically me, I'm not like split personality, I am just one person. I also understand the benefit for me to appear more extrovert in the workplace. So going on those courses and understanding like the results of people, that's the sort of question I'll be asking of people on the course with me. It's like, well, how did you answer that? Is that what you would be like at home? Has it covered all parts of your persona, or is it just that small part that you see in the workplace?
I think that's really insightful, Sophie. And I think as much as people say, oh, I'm bringing my whole self to work, in that very sort of fashionable way of saying it, I think people don't. I think I always talk about, a bit like what you've just said, like my work persona and my personal persona. And on one of our other episodes, somebody said to me, oh, Charlotte's super organised. I'm like, yeah, at work. At home, my partner's like, Charlotte, you're not organised. And I'm like, but my feedback at work is like super organised. So I think, I can relate to what you're saying, and certainly on the introversion piece, after a while, my social battery is drained. So if I go and spend a couple of days in the office, I enjoy it at the time, but then I'm like, oh, now I need a day at home.
Yeah.
But people don't necessarily, like to your point about the Myers-Briggs thing, we're like, oh, you're introvert? And they're shocked. So I think it's interesting, but I do like the fact that you specifically are asking people, how are you answering this? Because I think that's really insightful.
I think this oh, sorry, Sophie, you're going to say something. Sorry.
No, there was just one thing from before. It's like a complete segue back to something Charlotte said before when we were talking about being a people leader, that I meant to comment on, and before I forget, is when you're when you've got a lot of people in your team. The other thing that you've got to bear in mind is the fact, if you are somebody who leads with empathy, that means it takes on a lot of toll for you personally. So the more you have, the more of you, and it kind of links, I guess, with that social battery as well, the more you're drained, so that you get the people that you're looking after, who are reporting to you, might not get the full version of you because your battery drains. That was all.
No, but tied to that, I always say to my team, I'm a morning person. If you want to talk to me about something really important, let's talk before 3 o'clock, because after 3 o'clock, I can get on and do all the analytical stuff and what have you. But actually having a sensible, robust conversation, my battery's gone by that point. Whereas like I'm early bird, I can start at sort of 7 in the morning and be like on my coffee, but by 3 o'clock, my battery is done. So I always make sure that I make it clear to my team, this is how I best work. How do you best work? And we have that conversation up front.
That's really key. It's the how we best work, because I think the other thing is people assume as a leader is that you've just got to think wholly about your team, which you are, but it's got to work for yourself as well, because it's a two-way street. It's like a partnership. It doesn't matter if you're talking about service provision, you're working with third parties, you're working with partners. That's the same in a team. Everybody's got to consider everybody else. Empathy isn't just a case of us being empathetic to the people that we're leading. It's also, I'm a human too. I may be your boss, I may be leading you, but I have feelings. I have times of the day I'm the same as you. I'm much more a morning person than an evening person. There's things that I need. So whilst my needs aren't, I'm not going to trump whatever you need with what I need, but I would ask you to consider that I am a fellow human and to treat me with empathy as well.
Yeah, great.
I think this leads us on to the next kind of question, and we've kind of covered some of it already, really. Is, Sophie, what do you do, and like, how do you kind of continue to work on your leadership skills? Is there anything that you do or read or kind of get involved in to kind of improve leadership skills?
I think for the most part, it's all about it being experience-led. It's one of the joys of being a consultant is that I get to go into lots of different companies and I can see the different ways people do things. And I get ideas from, or I learn from how other organizations are working, of like, oh, no, don't want to do that. Or that's an absolutely cracking idea. I love that. So there's that. Mentoring, being a mentor, I learn a hell of a lot being a mentor. And And as much as I'm sort of trying to impart advice and experience to the people I'm working with, particularly because most of the people I'm working with are a lot younger than me, I'm like, ooh, didn't think of that, or that didn't exist when I was younger. I might consider that. But also, so that there's that side of stuff. I do read, but I'm going to be completely honest here. I don't often read a business book from start to finish. I will pick the bits that I want to read, the bits that are important, or important to me rather, because as I said at the beginning, I'm a geek, right? I love fantasy fiction. I can sit in fiction and I can read book after book after book. When it comes to business books, I struggle a little bit. So I listen to the things that people around me are talking about in terms of the books that they're reading. I've certainly had some ideas of books from you, Lucy, and I'll get those books and then I'll flick through the book. I'll have a look at what's in the contents page. I'll have a look in the index. I'm like, right, okay, that bit looks really interesting. And I go a little bit like a magpie, and I'll just read snippets of different books. I might end up going back and reading it from start to finish, but not always. But I would say, I mean, there's all sorts of books out there in terms of leadership and personal growth. But I find the most value from talking to other people, because there are people who are a lot better at reading business books than I am. And certainly from the conversations you and I have had, Lucy, I've learned a hell of a lot, loads and loads and loads of stuff. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting. I'm going to go and research that. I think that for me is, besides the sort of general experiences that I'm living through, it's through the other people. Because I also don't know where to start. This goes back to that question of like, what do you want to be when you grow up? I don't know. I'll figure it out probably at the time I'm sort of 80 and just doddering around like, oh, do you know, I should have done that for however long. But I learn with other people. That's the best way for me, because whilst I've got a certain level of intelligence and all that sort of stuff, there are people that are a lot more academic than me who love to read non-fiction business books or personal growth books. And I love the conversation. So Charlotte, you and I need to have a conversation after this, because I need to learn more, but I don't necessarily know where to go. So it's through conversation more than anything, as well as, like I said, my experience.
Definitely, and love to have a conversation. I feel like I found a real kindred spirit with you anyway. But it's really interesting that you talk about being a magpie and like picking out the bits, and also you talked about that you enjoy like fantasy fiction. We need to introduce you to another one of our guests who also loves fantasy fiction. We'll talk about that offline. But like for me, I am that person that's on the sunbed on holiday that reads business book after business book after business. They must all think I'm so boring when I'm like the funniest one I read, I got some like raised eyebrows about it, because I was reading a book called Surrounded by Idiots, which is about communication style. It's not as offensive as it sounds, but there was a few like raised eyebrows around by the swimming pool. But I will just read and I can just consume them and I get so much from them. But equally, I take on board what you're saying about talking to other people. And I think absolutely one of the best ways you can do that is building that community and that network and talking to more people. And, you know, Lucy and I talk about books all the time. And I'm like, oh, have you read this book? I'm reading this book at the moment. And I think that's how a lot of the thought process into where I select books come from, is like I'll either read something online that references a book that I'm like, oh, actually that sounds really interesting, or through having conversations, or just being like, I've got this particular challenge at work and I'm thinking, I wonder if there's anybody's written anything about it, and then I'll just consume them. But I'm terrible at reading fiction books now. I haven't read a fiction book for ages. I think everybody thinks I'm really boring because I read them. I just read lots of business books. But
I also think we can utilise, there's lots of e-learning stuff now that's available. And if you do feel like you need some kind of, you want to learn a new skill, or you want to maybe try and improve a certain aspect of your leadership style, whether that's communication or having difficult conversations, LinkedIn Learning has like a whole portfolio. And then what I will say as well, and again, I'm sorry I'm talking about coaching again, which I feel like I always talk about, but I do feel like the coach training that I have done has turned me around and made me a better leader, person, friend, of how I approach things. So if there is like courses out there just to do kind of like a 101 kind of coaches, leaders, skill set course, whatever that could be, I really would encourage people to do that if you feel that that's something that you need. Because for me personally, it's really transformed the way I've even just managed my career now as well.
I also think, listening to podcasts, for those people who don't either like to read or have oh my god, my brain's gone now, dyslexia and struggle with reading, podcasts or audiobooks are a great other way to consume that information, or it's just a learning style preference. Going back to thinking about like Myers-Briggs, one of the things I do with my teams a lot is do the Honey and Mumford learning styles preference, because actually when you understand how somebody learns something, then when you're trying to explain a task to them, I was trying to think about, okay, so they're a theorist, so they'll learn best this way. However, I am that annoying person that is equal quadrants across all of them, which apparently is very rare. But for me, I'm a situational learner, whereas most people are strong in one of the quadrants, and it's helpful as a leader to understand how people learn, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Going back to the stakeholder management piece as well, you've got to take into consideration how people absorb information. Something that I say quite a lot when I'm working with my clients is if I'm developing processes and stuff for people, I'll write your process, but we need to do X, Y, and Z as well. Because I don't, for me, it depends on where I am, what I'm doing, whatever else is going on in the world, as well as to how I'm best receiving information and how I learn best. I like to be told things, but I also like to read. But I also like visual things as well. So absolutely. I think that's maybe where I struggle slightly with the business books. If it's got, I don't need a picture book, but if it's got diagrams and something that sort of really
brings it to life.
Brings it to life. I think that's the Phoenix Project, whilst not a business book, that's one of my favorite business books because it's a story, but you learn so much from it at the same time. I think, I think that's an important thing.
Nice.
There's a follow-on from the Phoenix Project, I think.
There is.
Yeah.
The Unicorn Project, I think.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
I'm about 10 pages in and I haven't picked it up for a while, but I am going to pick it back up again because I do really like that style.
Yeah, I've not read it, but I've been listening to it on Audible, which is interesting.
I will have to add this into our comments as a useful resource.
Definitely. I feel like there's loads of resources from this session today that we need to put on here.
Definitely. So, Sophie, before we wrap up, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our audience on your experience around leadership and leadership skills?
I would say the most important thing, going back to something I said before, is just be yourself. That you're going to get more from other people if you're authentic. One thing or the little quote that I say all the time is be bold, be brave, be you. And it doesn't matter what you're doing. It doesn't matter whether it's work, whether it's personal, it doesn't matter whether it's to do with leadership. Just be yourself, because you're going to get more from people by doing that. And I think we're all individuals and we are so powerful as individuals. But if you share who you are with other people, I think that's why people warm to me, is because I just share who I am. And I hope they like it. If they do, that's brilliant. If they don't, that's fine. But give me the feedback. Tell me where I could develop. But just be yourself, and don't be afraid to be yourself. And I think the only other thing would be, whilst it's not really leadership, but don't be afraid to say no. If it doesn't work for you, or it doesn't sit with your values, there are ways to say, thank you very much, but I don't want to go with that approach. That doesn't work for me. I think it's important just to stick to your guns and be who you are, and unapologetically so.
I love that. That's great. Listen, Sophie, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a fantastic episode. I personally enjoyed it so much. I feel like I've found a kindred spirit in you. And we hope you guys have also enjoyed this episode and found it super useful. If you would like to be a guest yourself, or you've got a topic that you'd like to talk or you'd like to talk to us about, or you would like to join us and talk about, then feel free to email us at careersandcoffeell@gmail.com. LL is for LinkedIn Live, for those who are interested. And if you want to catch up on any past episodes from season 1 or anything we've done on season 2 so far, or we did do a mini series called Tailoring Your Trajectory, you can find that all on our YouTube channel at Careers and Coffee. So that leaves us all just to say goodbye, and thank you so much again, Sophie, for joining us today. See you next time.
Bye.